The heart monitor was screaming a solid, high-pitched tone of death. On the table lay Commander Jack Reynolds, a Tier 1 Navy SEAL bleeding out from a catastrophic ambush. And standing over him was the Chief of Surgery, a man more concerned with protocol than survival. He had just ordered security to drag the one person who could save Jack out of the operating room. Why? Because she looked too young, because he thought she was just a nurse. He didn't know that 5 minutes from now, a 4-star general would kick those doors down and scream the order that would also to change. Medical history. She takes over now. This is the story of Dr. Elara Vance, the woman the Navy tried to silence, and the miracle that shocked the world. The rain wasn't just falling. It was hammering against the reinforced glass of the trauma bay at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. It was 0200 hours, the witching hour for medical personnel, where the worst cases always seemed to roll in. Dr. Elara. Vance tightened her ponytail, her eyes scanning the digital intake board. She looked absurdly young for a trauma fellow, barely 28, with soft features that made patients ask for her ID badge before they let her touch them. Most of the senior staff assumed she was a student nurse or a junior resident. They didn't see the scars under her scrubs. They didn't know that before medical school she had been a combat medic in the sandbox, patching up blowout wounds in the back of vibrating Blackhawks while under fire. "We've got an inbound bird," shouted the charge nurse, breathless. 5 minutes out. Massive trauma. It's a Navy extraction gone wrong. Elara felt that familiar cold prickle at the base of her neck. "Who is the attending?" she asked, grabbing a pair of sterile gloves. Dr. Thorne, the nurse, whispered, a look of sympathy crossing her face. Elara suppressed a groan. Dr. Marcus Thorne was the chief of trauma surgery. He was 55, silver-haired, brilliant, and possessed an ego the size of the aircraft carrier the patient was likely coming from. He was also the man who had publicly told Elara, just yesterday, that she lacked the gravitas for high-stakes surgery. The double doors burst open as the transport team wheeled the stretcher in. The energy in the room spiked. "Clear the bay," Thorne bellowed, striding in like a king. "What do we have? Male, 32 years old. Multiple GSWs to the chest and left thigh. BP is 80/50 and dropping. Pulse is thready at 130. This is Commander Jack Reynolds. Call sign Reaper." The name sucked the air out of the room. Jack Reynolds wasn't just a soldier. He was a legend in the special operations community. He had led the extraction of the hostages in Syria 2 months prior. Now he was grey, clammy, and gasping for air through an intubation tube. Elara moved instantly. She didn't wait for orders. She stepped up to the left side of the stretcher, her hands moving over the SEAL's chest. "Breath sounds are absent on the right," Elara announced, her voice calm, but cutting through the noise. "Trachea is deviated. He's tensioning. I need a 14-gauge needle stat." "Step away," Vance Thorne barked from the head of the bed. "I didn't ask for a resident's opinion. We need to stabilize the leg. That femoral artery is nicked. The leg can wait. The lung can't." Elara shot back. Her eyes locked on the distended veins in Reynolds' neck. "He's going into cardiac arrest in 10 seconds if we don't decompress that chest." Thorne stopped what he was doing and looked up, his face reddening. "Dr. Vance, you are a fellow. You are here to observe and assist when asked. You are not here to diagnose. Step back before I have you removed from this program." He has no air entry, Elara insisted, grabbing the needle kit herself. Look at the monitor. His saturation is 75%. Security, Thorne yelled. Get this girl out of my trauma bay. She's hysterical. Two burly MPs, military police, stationed at the door, hesitated. They knew Elara. She had stitched up one of their hands last week. But Thorne was a colonel. Rank mattered. Ma'am, you have to step back, one MP said, gently putting a hand on her shoulder. Elara looked at Jack Reynolds. She saw the life fading from his eyes. She saw the hero who had saved dozens of lives drowning in his own blood because of one man's ego. You're killing him, Elara said, her voice low and deadly. Get her out, Thorne screamed, throwing a clamp onto the tray with a clang. The MPs dragged her back. As she was pulled toward the doors, the heart monitor changed its rhythm. It went from a frantic beeping to a chaotic, jagged rhythm. VFib, the anesthesiologist, shouted. We're losing him. Thorne looked shocked. He grabbed the paddles whistle. Charge to 200. Elara stood by the door, tears of frustration stinging her eyes, held back by two guards, while the hero on the table began to die. The chaos in the trauma bay escalated into a frenzy. Thorne was sweating now. The confident arrogance was cracking. Clear thump. Reynolds's body arched off the table. Still in V-fib. No pulse, the nurse reported, her voice trembling. Charge to 300. Push one of epi. Thorne shouted. Why isn't he converting? Elara knew why. You can shock a heart all you want, but if the heart is being crushed by pressure in the chest cavity, it can't pump. It was simple for physics. Thorne was treating the electrical problem, not the mechanical one. Outside the glass doors, the hallway was suddenly flooded with a different kind of intensity. A phalanx of uniformed officers marched down the corridor, boots striking the linoleum in unison. In the center walked a man who wore his 4 stars, not as a decoration, but as a warning. General Thomas Sterling, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He didn't stop at the nurse's station. He didn't ask for permission. He walked straight toward the trauma bay doors. Inside, Thorne was preparing for a third shock. Everybody. Back clear, nothing. Just the flat monotone drone of the flatline. Time of death. Thorne began looking at the clock. Don't you dare call it, a voice boomed from the doorway. The doors swung open, hitting the walls with a crash. General Sterling stood there, rain still dripping from his trench coat. The room froze. Even the heart monitor seemed to quiet down in deference to his presence. Thorne lowered the paddles. General Sterling. Sir, we did everything. The injuries were incompatible with life. Sterling ignored him. His steel-grey eyes scanned the room, bypassing the senior surgeons, the terrified nurses, and the expensive equipment. He was looking for someone specific. He saw Elara Vance standing near the disposal bins, arms crossed, her face a mask of fury. Dr. Vance Sterling said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a command that could launch nuclear missiles. Why is my best operator dead on this table? Thorne stepped forward, trying to regain control. So Dr. Vance is merely a junior fellow. She was removed for insubordination. She attempted to interfere with... I didn't ask you, Marcus. Sterling snapped without looking at him. I asked her. Elara stepped forward, shaking off the MP's grip. She walked right up to the general, ignoring the glare from Thorne. He's not dead yet, General, but he will be in about 2 minutes if we don't relieve the tension, pneumothorax on his right side. Dr. Thorne missed it because he was fixated on the leg wound. Thorne sputtered. That is a baseless accusation from a nurse who thinks she's a surgeon. There was no clinical sign of "open the shirt." Elara interrupted, looking at the general. Sterling nodded at her. "Do it." Elara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a scalpel from the tray, bypassing the needle. She moved to the dead body of Jack Reynolds. With a single decisive motion, she sliced into the intercostal space between his ribs. The sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of trapped air escaping under high pressure. It sounded like a tire deflating. Immediately, the flat line on the monitor flickered. A jagged line appeared. Then another. Sinus rhythm returning. The anesthesiologist gasped. "We have a pulse." "It's weak, but it's there." The room went dead silent. All eyes turned to Thorne. He was pale, his mouth slightly open, staring at the monitor that proved his incompetence. Elara didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She pressed a sterile dressing over the incision. "He's back, but he's unstable. He needs the OR, now." The bullet in his chest is pressing on the pericardium. Thorne shook his head, trying to salvage his pride. "Fine. I'll scrub in. Prepare OR1. He moved to take charge again. "Stop," General Sterling said. Thorne turned. General Sterling walked over to the operating table. He looked down at the soldier who had just come back from the dead, then looked at the chief of surgery. "You're relieved," Marcus Sterling said coldly. "Sir, you can't be serious. I am the chief of this department. You cannot put a child in charge of a complex thoracic surgery on a high-value asset." Sterling turned to Elara. "Dr. Vance, you served in the Korangal Valley, didn't you?" "Yes, sir. 2018. "I read your file," Sterling said, addressing the room. "Distinguished Service Cross for treating 12 Marines while under mortar fire. You performed a field amputation with a pocket knife and a tourniquet while you had shrapnel in your own shoulder. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Elara whispered. Sterling turned back to Thorne. "She has more combat surgical experience in her little finger than you have in your entire career of elective surgeries, Marcus. Get out of my OR." Thorne stood frozen, humiliated in front of his entire staff. Security Sterling barked at the same MPs who had held Elara back. "Escort Dr. Thorne out of the building. If he resists, detain him." As Thorne was led away, fuming and threatening lawsuits, the general turned to Elara. The room was waiting. The patient was critical. Dr. Vance, the general, said, his voice softening just a fraction. "He's your patient. She takes over now." Elara took a deep breath. She looked at the team nurses and anesthesiologists who were looking at her with new eyes. Fear, respect, and anticipation. "All right, Elara," said her voice, commanding the room. "Let's move." OR1. I want 4 units of O-negative ready. Call the perfusionist. We're cracking his chest. As they wheeled Jack Reynolds toward the elevator, Elara glanced at his face. He was unconscious, battered and broken. But he was alive. She had won the battle for his body. But as the elevator doors closed, she knew the war was just beginning. Thorne wouldn't go quietly, and the surgery she was about to perform was impossible for even the best surgeons in the world. And deep inside Jack's chest, something was waiting for her. Something that wasn't on the X-ray. The air in operating room 1 was sterile cold and smelled faintly of burning flesh, the scent of the cautery pen, sealing blood vessels. Dr. Elara Vance stood on a step stool. She had to. At 5'4", the operating table was set high for the average male surgeon. Beside her, Dr. Sarah Jenkins, the lead anesthesiologist, who had silently rooted for Elara in the trauma bay, watched the monitors like a hawk. "BP is stable at 90/60, Sarah whispered. "He's under deep. Do what you have to do, Elara." Elara looked down at Jack Reynolds' chest. The skin was prepped with orange iodine. The jagged entry wound was an ugly crater just left of his sternum. "Scalpel," Elara requested. The scrub nurse, a veteran named Margaret, who had worked with Dr. Thorne for 20 years, hesitated for a microsecond before slapping the instrument into Elara's palm. That hesitation spoke volumes. They were all waiting for her to fail. They were waiting for the nurse to kill the hero. Elara took a breath, centering herself. She wasn't in Germany anymore. In her mind, she was back in the dust of Kandahar, where the only thing that mattered was speed and instinct. She made the incision, a clean, unwavering line down the center of the chest. "Sternal saw," she commanded. The high-pitched whine of the bone saw filled the room. It was a brutal sound, one that usually unnerved students. Elara's hand didn't shake. She split the breastbone, revealing the pericardium, the sac holding the heart. It was distended dark purple. "Tamponade," Elara said. "The sac is full of blood. The heart can't beat because it's drowning. Suction." She carefully snipped the pericardium open. Blood gushed out, instantly sucked away by the vacuum tube. And there it was. The human heart. It beat sluggishly, twisting in the chest cavity. "There's the bleeder," Elara pointed. "Right ventricle. But wait." She frowned behind her surgical loops. She followed the track of the damage. The bullet had grazed the ventricle, causing the bleed, but it hadn't stopped there. "Where is the projectile?" Elara asked. X-ray showed it in the mediastinum. She reached her gloved fingers deep into the chest cavity, behind the beating heart. It was a terrifying maneuver. One wrong move, and she could tear the aorta, killing him instantly. "Elara, his pressure is dropping," Sarah warned. 70/40. "He's not liking this." "I can feel it," Elara whispered. It's lodged against the spine. But it feels wrong. It's too big for a standard 5.56 round." She grabbed a long pair of forceps. "I'm going in. Don't breathe." The room went still. Even the circulating nurse stopped counting sponges. Elara maneuvered the forceps blindly behind the heart, guided only by the sensation in her fingertips. She clamped onto the foreign object. "Got it!" She pulled slowly. The metal scraped against bone. As she withdrew the object, she rotated her wrist to avoid nicking the pulmonary artery. Clink. She dropped the object into the metal kidney dish, held by Margaret. Everyone leaned in to look. It wasn't a bullet. It was a jagged, twisted piece of titanium shrapnel about 2 inches long. But stuck to the side of it was something else, a small, crushed cylinder with wires protruding from it. "What is that?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. Elara stared at it. "That's not from an enemy rifle. That's a fragment from a specialized drone casing, and that cylinder—" She looked up, her eyes wide. "That's a biometric tracker. Someone was tracking him." Suddenly the heart monitor screamed, "He's arresting!" Sarah yelled, "We lost the pulse. I'm starting compressions." "No," Elara shouted, putting her hand up to stop Sarah. "You can't do compressions with an open chest. You'll shred the heart on the sternum edges." Then do something. He's flatlining. Elara looked at the heart. It was still, quivering like a bag of worms. The trauma of removing the shrapnel had sent it into shock. Internal paddles, Elara ordered. "We don't have them ready," Margaret cried. Thorne never used them. "Hand me the saline." Warm saline. Elara didn't wait for the paddles. She plunged her hands into the chest cavity. She cupped the Navy SEAL's heart in her two small hands. It was warm, slippery, and terrifyingly still. She began to squeeze. She manually pumped his blood for him. She became his heart. "Come on, Jack," she whispered, staring at his face, which was hidden behind the drapes. "Don't you die on me. Not after I saved you from Thorne." "Elara, you can't keep this up," Sarah said, checking the clock. 2 minutes down. Brain damage starts at 4. Push 1 millilugans of epi directly into the myocardium, Elara ordered. She kept squeezing. Her forearms burned. Her fingers cramped. But she didn't stop. She felt the texture of the muscle under her gloves. It felt heavy. Dead. Then she felt a flutter, a resistance. The heart pushed back against her hand. She pulled her hands away slightly. The rhythm returned strong and defiant. "We have a pulse," Sarah breathed out, slumping back in her chair. Sinus rhythm. 110 beats per minute. Elara didn't cheer. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the adrenaline wash through her. "Let's close him up. Double sutures on the sternum." And Margaret. "Yes, doctor." The nurse's voice was filled with a new, profound respect. "Take that shrapnel and the tracker. Put it in a specimen jar. Seal it. And give it directly to General Sterling. Do not let it leave this room with anyone else. Do you understand?" "Yes." Elara looked down at Jack Reynolds. He was alive. But as she looked at the tracker in the dish, she realized that saving his life might have just put a target on her own back. The sun was rising over the German hills when Elara finally stripped off her bloody scrubs. She had been in the OR for 6 hours. Her hands were trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion and the crash of adrenaline. She walked out of the scrub room and into the hallway, looking for a vending machine and a dark corner to sleep in. Instead, she found a firing squad. Not literal guns, but something potentially worse for her career. Standing at the nurse's station was Dr. Marcus Thorne. He was back, and he wasn't alone. Beside him stood the hospital administrator, Mr. Holloway, and 2 severe-looking men in suits who reeked of legal counsel. "There she is," Thorne said, pointing a manicured finger at her. His face was a mask of smug vengeance. "Dr. Elara Vance Holloway?" asked, stepping forward. He held a clipboard like a shield. "Yes," Elara said, her voice raspy. "How is the patient?" "The patient is in recovery," Holloway said coldly, "which is a miracle considering the assault that took place last night." Elara blinked. "Assault, I performed life-saving surgery under the direct order of General Sterling. General Sterling has no jurisdiction over the credentialing and safety protocols of this civilian-military partnership hospital," Holloway stated. "You are a trauma fellow. You are not board-certified for thoracic surgery. You forcibly removed the chief of surgery from his own operating room, using armed guards. That is gross misconduct, insubordination, and endangerment of a patient." "I saved his life." Elara snapped, her fatigue replaced by anger. Thorne missed the pneumothorax. "He was treating a leg wound while the man suffocated." "That is your opinion?" Thorne interjected smoothly. "My report states that I was preparing to address the chest when you became hysterical and violent. You leveraged a confused general to stage a coup in my OR." "A confused general?" A deep voice rumbled from the waiting area. General Sterling stood up from a plastic chair. He looked tired still in his muddy boots, holding a cup of terrible hospital coffee. Holloway stiffened. "General, we appreciate your emotional investment, but this is an administrative matter." "It's a military matter now," Sterling said, walking over. He handed the specimen jar to Elara. "Because of what Dr. Vance found inside my man." Thorne looked at the jar. A bullet fragment. "So what?" "It's a tracker," Marcus Sterling said quietly. "Commander Reynolds wasn't just ambushed. He was sold out, and whoever put that in him wanted to make sure he didn't come back." The hallway went silent. Regardless, Holloway said, trying to regain control, Dr. Vance broke protocol. "The liability is astronomical. If Reynolds develops a complication, the hospital will be sued into oblivion because an unqualified student did the cutting." Holloway turned to Elara. "Dr. Vance, effective immediately, you are suspended pending a formal inquiry. You are to surrender your badge and ID. You are barred from the hospital premises. Security will escort you out." Elara felt like she had been punched in the gut. "You can't do this. He's my patient. I need to monitor his post-op." "He is Dr. Thorne's patient now," Holloway said. Thorne smiled. It was a reptilian smile. "Don't worry, Elara. I'll make sure the records show you assisted before you had your breakdown. I'm generous like that." "You touch him and he dies," Elara warned, stepping forward. "Security." Holloway barked. 2 guards, different ones this time, who didn't know her, stepped forward. They took Elara by the arms. General Elara looked at Sterling. Sterling looked furious, but he knew the game. He couldn't fight hospital bureaucracy with a gun. Not yet. "Go," Elara Sterling said softly. "Get some sleep. I've got a watch on Reynolds's door." As Elara was marched toward the exit, stripped of her badge, she felt a surge of helplessness. She had beaten death, but she couldn't beat the ego of a small man with a big sidelined title. She was tossed out into the cold morning rain of the parking lot. She sat in her beat-up sedan, shivering. She should go home. She should call a lawyer. But she couldn't. She kept thinking about the tracker. And she kept thinking about Thorne's smile. Thorne wasn't just incompetent. He was desperate to regain control. And desperate men made mistakes. If Reynolds had been sold out, the killer was still out there. And now the only person who knew the truth about the surgery was locked out of the building. Elara started her car. She didn't drive home. She drove to the back of the hospital near the loading docks, where the laundry trucks came in. She knew a nurse who took smoke breaks there. She wasn't going home. She was breaking back in. Because she knew something Thorne didn't. Jack Reynolds wasn't just a patient. When she had touched his heart, she had felt the scarring on the back of the ventricle. Old scarring. Jack Reynolds had been operated on before, by a technique only used in one place, a classified black site medical facility Elara had briefed on years ago. Jack wasn't just a Navy SEAL. He was a ghost. And if Thorne tried to treat him like a normal patient, the drugs in the standard protocol wouldn't just fail. They would interact with the experimental enhancement in Jack's blood and kill him within the hour. Elara pulled her hood up. She had to get to the ICU. She had to save him again. Elara smelled like bleach and fabric softener. She had slipped in through the loading bay, hidden inside a laundry cart filled with dirty scrubs. It was undignified, illegal, and the only way to save her patient. She moved through the service corridors of the hospital, avoiding the cameras. She knew the layout of Landstuhl better than the architects. She had pulled double shifts here for 2 years, learning the rhythm of the building. She reached the freight elevator and hit the button for the ICU. Up on the 4th floor in ICU Room 1, the situation was deteriorating exactly as Alara had predicted. Dr. Thorne stood at the foot of Jack Reynolds' bed, surrounded by a gaggle of impressed medical students. He was lecturing them on his successful surgery. "As you can see," Thorne said, checking his watch, "the patient is stable. The key to these trauma cases is rapid stabilization of the femoral artery. The chest wound was secondary." He was lying to students who didn't know better. But the monitors weren't lying. Jack Reynolds was sweating profusely. His heart rate was creeping up 120, 130, 140. "Sir," a resident pointed out, "his temperature is rising, 103 degrees. Is that sepsis?" Thorne frowned. "Post-op fever is normal. Increase the IV antibiotics." "He's thrashing," the nurse said. Jack's eyes were still closed, but his muscles were bunching under the sheets. He was fighting the restraints. "He's emerging from anesthesia too fast," Thorne said, annoyed that his lecture was being interrupted. "Nurse, give him 10 millilograms of midazolam and push 50 of propofol. Let's keep him under until morning." That was the kill shot. Alara burst through the service doors of the ICU, just as the nurse was drawing up the sedative. She didn't look like a doctor anymore. She was wearing a stolen maintenance jumpsuit, her hair wild, her eyes frantic. "Don't push that drug!" Alara screamed, sprinting down the hallway. Security guards at the station jumped up. "Hey, stop her!" Thorne looked up, his face twisting in disgust. I told you, Vance, you are finished." "He has an altered metabolic pathway," Alara yelled, dodging a security guard who lunged for her. "Look at his records. He's Tier 1. If you give him midazolam with his current cortisol levels, you'll trigger a serotonin storm. You'll fry his brain." "Grab her," Thorne shouted at the guards. "She's psychotic." The nurse, confused and terrified by the shouting, hesitated, but Thorne snatched the syringe from her hand. "I'll do it myself. This patient needs sedation now." Alara was 10 feet away. 2 guards tackled her from the side, slamming her into the glass wall of the ICU room. "No, Marcus, don't." Alara choked out, pinned against the glass. Thorne ignored her. He leaned over the rail and injected the drug into Jack's IV port. There. Quiet time. The effect was instantaneous, but it wasn't quiet. Jack Reynolds's eyes snapped open. They weren't the groggy eyes of a patient waking up. They were dilated pitch black and terrified. The drug reaction hit his nervous system like a lightning bolt. Instead of sedating him, the chemical interaction with his stress hormones caused a paradoxical reaction. Adrenaline dumped into his system. Jack didn't scream. He roared. With a sound of tearing fabric, Jack ripped his right arm free from the leather restraint. The strength required to do that was inhuman. He tore the leather strap right off the metal frame. Thorne froze the empty syringe still in his hand. Jack sat up his chest, heaving the fresh staples in his sternum holding by a thread. He looked at Thorne. In his delirium, he didn't see a doctor. He saw an enemy combatant holding a weapon. Jack's hand shot out. He grabbed Thorne by the throat. Thorne's eyes bulged. Hostile Jack gritted out his voice, a gravelly growl of pure instinct. The medical students screamed and scattered. The security guards released Elara, unsure whether to arrest her or save the chief of surgery, who was being strangled by a dying man. Code Grey combatant in ICU. The charge nurse screamed over the PA. Jack tightened his grip. Thorne's face was turning purple. Jack reached for the scalpel on the nearby tray with his other hand. "Jack, stand down," Elara shouted. She didn't run away. She ran toward the monster. She grabbed Jack's wrist, the one holding the scalpel. Jack whipped his head around his eyes, locking onto hers. He raised the blade. He didn't recognize her. He was lost in the fog of war and drug toxicity. "Jack, it's Doc." "Elara," said her voice, firm, cutting through the panic in the room. "Look at me. You're in Germany. You're safe. Drop the blade." Jack blinked. The grip on Thorne's neck loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. "Ambush," he muttered. "They're coming." "I know," Elara said softly, ignoring the guards who had drawn their tasers. "But he's not the enemy. He's just an idiot. Let him go, Jack." Jack looked at Thorne, then at Elara. The haze in his eyes cleared just a fraction. He saw the compassion in her face. He remembered the voice from the darkness, the voice that had told his heart to beat. He dropped the scalpel. He released Thorne. Thorne collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat. Jack slumped back onto the pillows, his energy spent. "Doc," he wheezed. "Something's wrong. Inside." "I know," Elara said, checking his pulse. "It was erratic. He gave you the wrong meds. I need to flush your system." She turned to the terrified nurse. "Give me 1 milliams of flumazanil and a liter of saline wide open. Now, unless you want him to kill everyone in this room next time he wakes up." The nurse didn't look at Thorne for permission. She handed Elara the meds. As Elara pushed the antidote stabilizing Jack, the doors to the ICU burst open again. But it wasn't more doctors. It was General Sterling, and behind him a squad of MPs with assault rifles. "Secure the room," Sterling barked. Thorne scrambled up from the floor, raspy and red-faced. "General, arrest him. Arrest that animal. He tried to kill me. And arrest her for trespassing." Sterling looked at Thorne, then at the bruised neck. "Looks to me like he was defending himself from malpractice, Marcus." Sterling walked over to the bed. He looked at Elara, who was calmly adjusting Jack's IV. "You broke back in?" Sterling noted. "You left the back door open." "Sir," Elara lied. She knew he hadn't, but she also knew he approved. "Good thing you did," Sterling said grimly. "Because we just analyzed that tracker you pulled out of him." The general lowered his voice. "It wasn't transmitting to the enemy, Elara. It was transmitting to a satellite network owned by a private military contractor. One of ours." Elara went cold. Someone on our side wanted him dead. "He knows something," Sterling said, looking at the unconscious SEAL. "Jack found something in Syria that he wasn't supposed to see. And now that they know the tracker is offline." Click. The lights in the ICU went out. The hum of the ventilators stopped. The monitors went black. The emergency red lights failed to trigger. Total darkness. "They're here," Jack whispered from the bed. He was awake again, and this time he was lucid. The darkness in the ICU was absolute, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the rain-streaked windows. The silence was heavier than the darkness. The hum of the hospital was gone. Power had been cut manually. "Everyone down," General Sterling's voice was a harsh whisper. The MPs dropped to a knee, weapons raised. "Is this a power outage?" A medical student whimpered. "No." Jack Reynolds rasped. He sat up, ripping the IV line out of his arm. He didn't care about the blood. "It's a breach. They cut the hard line. They're coming to finish the job." Who, Elara asked, grabbing a heavy oxygen tank to use as a weapon. "The cleaners," Jack said. A sound like a suppressed sneeze. One of the MPs standing near the door jerked backward, a dark hole appearing in his forehead. He crumpled to the floor without a sound. Contact front. Sterling roared, flipping a table for cover. The double doors of the ICU slid open. 3 figures entered. They were dressed as surgeons, scrubs, masks, caps, but they moved with the fluid, predatory grace of elite operators. In their hands they held suppressed pistols. They weren't here to talk. They were here to sanitize the room. "Fire," Sterling ordered. The remaining 3 MPs opened up. The roar of carbine fire was deafening in the enclosed space. Glass shattered. The surgeons moved with terrifying speed, diving behind the nurses' station. Bullets chewed up the drywall and smashed the monitors. "Get the civilians out," Elara shouted, grabbing the terrified nurse and shoving her toward the back storage room. Thorne was already cowering under a desk, sobbing. Jack swung his legs off the bed. He was weak, bleeding, and his chest felt like it had been hit by a sledgehammer, but the warrior mindset had taken over. He scanned the room for a weapon. Nothing but medical equipment. One of the assassins popped up and double-tapped the MP nearest to the general. The MP went down. Sterling returned fire, his sidearm booming, but he was pinned down. "They're flanking," Jack yelled. "Elara." The crash cart, Elara understood immediately. She kicked the wheels of the crash cart, a heavy metal cabinet, filled with emergency drugs and equipment, sending it careening across the room toward the assassins. The distraction worked. The assassin turned his weapon toward the cart. In that split second, Jack moved. He didn't run. He lunged. He grabbed a pair of trauma shears from the bedside table. He tackled the lead assassin. It was a collision of violence. Jack, half naked and stitched together, slammed the armored man into the wall. The assassin tried to bring his gun to bear, but Jack jammed the trauma shears into the man's brachial artery, right under the armpit of his vest. Blood sprayed across the pristine floor. The assassin dropped. Jack grabbed the man's pistol and rolled. He put 2 rounds into the chest of the second assassin, who was aiming at the general. The assassin's body armor absorbed the shots, but the force knocked him backward over the counter. "Clear right," Sterling shouted. Advancing and finishing the target with a headshot, only 1 left. The third assassin had circled around the back. He emerged from the shadows behind Elara. Elara turned, sensing the movement. She saw the black bore of the suppressor leveled at her face. The assassin's eyes above the mask were cold dead. She froze. There was no time to run. The assassin squeezed the trigger. Click. A misfire. A 1 in a million jam. Before the assassin could clear the chamber, a metal tray slammed into the side of his head with the force of a freight train. It was Dr. Thorne. Thorne, the coward, the egoist, had swung a heavy surgical tray with both hands, screaming in sheer terror. It wasn't bravery. It was panic. But it was effective. The assassin stumbled. Elara didn't waste the moment. She grabbed the defibrillator paddles from the crash cart. She didn't have time to turn the machine on, but the heavy plastic paddles made for a solid, blunt weapon. She smashed the paddle into the assassin's throat. He gagged, dropping to his knees. Jack was there a second later. He didn't hesitate. He put a single round into the man's head. Silence returned to the room, ringing in their ears. Smoke from the gunshots hung in the air, mixing with the smell of blood and antiseptic. Jack leaned against the wall, sliding down as his adrenaline crashed. His chest was heaving, and fresh blood was seeping through his bandages. "Check them," Jack wheezed. "Make sure they're dead." Sterling moved through the room, kicking the pistols away from the bodies. "Clear," he announced. Elara rushed to Jack. "You ripped your stitches. You're bleeding internally again." "I'm fine." Jack lied, gripping her hand. His hand was sticky with the assassin's blood. You did good, Doc. For a civilian." Elara managed a shaky smile. "I learned from the best. And you?" She looked at Thorne, who was standing over the man he had hit, staring at his trembling hands. "You actually did something, Marcus." Thorne looked up. He was pale, shaking, and covered in plaster dust. He was going to kill you." "Yeah," Elara said. "He was." General Sterling holstered his weapon. He walked over to the assassin Jack had killed and pulled down the surgical mask. "I know this man," Sterling said, his voice grave. "He's former SS. He works for Blackwood Defense now. The same contractors running security for the peace talks in Geneva." Sterling looked at Jack. "What did you see in Syria?" Jack coughed, wincing. "I saw them moving chemical weapons, General. Not the rebels. Blackwood. They're staging a false flag attack to justify a new war. That's what the tracker was for. To make sure I didn't make it back to tell anyone." The gravity of the situation settled on them. They were in a hospital room with 3 dead mercenaries, a wounded witness to a global conspiracy, and a corrupt administration that had tried to fire the only doctor who could save him. "We can't stay here," Sterling said. "This was just the first wave. They'll send a cleanup crew to bomb the building if they have to. They don't care about collateral damage." "I can't move him," Elara said. "He needs surgery to repair the damage he just did to his chest wall." "We don't have a choice," Sterling said. "I have a chopper inbound on the roof." 5 minutes. I'm going with him," Elara said instantly. Elara Thorne said, stepping forward. "If you leave, if you go with them, you'll never practice medicine again. You'll be a fugitive." Elara looked at the hospital that had rejected her. She looked at Thorne, who had finally found a shred of humanity. And she looked at Jack, the soldier who had fought death twice in one night. "I'm not a doctor for the license, Marcus," Elara said, taking Jack's arm to help him stand. "I'm a doctor for the patient, and he's my patient." She turned to the general. "Let's go." The stairwell of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center was a concrete echo chamber of desperation. The elevators were still locked down by the security protocol, frozen in place by the same sabotage that had cut the power. That meant they had to move. Commander Jack. The heart monitor screamed a single unbroken note, death's warning siren. Commander Jack Reynolds, a Tier 1 Navy SEAL, lay on the operating table, blood pooling beneath him after a catastrophic ambush. Standing over him was the chief of surgery, rigid and unyielding, more loyal to protocol than survival. Moments earlier, he had ordered security to remove the only person capable of saving Jack. His reason was simple and fatal. She looked too young. He assumed she was just a nurse. He was wrong. Dr. Elara Vance stood frozen outside the operating room doors. Her jaw tight, her hands clenched. At 28, she carried the face of youth. But behind it was a past forged in war zones, where she had kept soldiers alive under fire. Inside Jack's vitals collapsed by the second. 5 minutes later, the doors slammed open. A 4-star general stormed in his voice, cutting through the chaos. She takes over now. That command would rewrite medical history and expose the cost of underestimating her. She caught it, stunned. "The regulator is set for rapid infusion," Thorne yelled, stepping aside, holding the heavy door open against the wind. "Go! Get him out of here!" Elara paused for a fraction of a second. In Thorne's eyes, she saw the shattering of an ego. He knew, in that cold rain, that he wasn't the hero of this story. He wasn't even the villain anymore. He was just a witness to something greater than himself. "Thank you, Marcus," Elara said. Thorne didn't respond. He just nodded a jerky, broken movement and turned his face away as the team rushed past him into the storm, the flight of the Valkyrie. The roof was a chaotic maelstrom. The UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter hovered inches above the helipad, its wheels barely touching the skids, fighting the crosswinds. The wash from the rotors felt like physical blows tearing at their clothes and stinging their eyes. "Load him up." Left side, the crew chief screamed, hauling Jack's stretcher into the belly of the bird. Elara scrambled in after him, slipping on the wet metal floor. The doors slammed shut, sealing them in a vibrating, dimly lit steel cocoon. "Go, go, go!" Sterling roared into his headset. The helicopter lurched upward, banking hard to the west, leaving the lights of the compromised hospital far below. Inside the cabin, the noise was deafening, a mechanical scream of engines and transmission gears. The lighting was a tactical red, bathing everything in the color of blood. Elara didn't have a seatbelt. She knelt on the floor beside Jack, using her knees to brace herself against the swaying of the aircraft. She spiked the bag of blood Thorne had given her, hanging it from a ceiling hook. "Talk to me, Doc!" Sterling yelled, ripping off his wet trench coat. He was already on the radio connecting to the secure global command network. "He's in hypovolemic shock," Elara yelled back, her fingers flying over the portable monitor. "Heart rate is 150. BP is 70/40. He's bleeding internally again." The movement tore something. Jack groaned, his head trashing from side to side. His eyes fluttered open, but they were unseeing, glazed over with pain and shock. "Cold," Jack whispered, his teeth chattering. "So cold." "I've got you, Jack," Elara said, leaning close to his ear so he could hear her over the turbine whine. She grabbed a thermal blanket and tucked it aggressively around him. "Stay with me. Don't you dare fade out now." She grabbed his hand. It was ice cold. The veins had collapsed. She needed to push more fluids, but she couldn't find a line. "Hold the light," she ordered the MP next to her. Elara ripped off her gloves. She needed to feel the vein. The helicopter hit an air pocket and dropped 20 feet. Elara slammed into the bulkhead, but didn't let go of Jack's arm. She ignored the bruising on her own ribs. "Come on," she whispered her thumb, searching for the faint pulse in his antecubital fossa. "Give me something to work with." There. A flutter. She guided the needle in. Flash of blood. She taped it down with fierce precision. Wide open, she shouted, squeezing the saline bag with both hands to force it into his system against the G-force of the helicopter. Across the cabin, General Sterling was waging a different kind of war. "This is General Thomas Sterling, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs." He barked into the boom mic, his voice cutting through the static of the encrypted channel. "Code Thunderstrike. Authentication Alpha Zulu Niner. Get the President. Wake him up. I don't care if he's in the middle of a damn state dinner." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "No, you listen to me." Sterling's voice was granite. The Syria intel was fabricated. "I have the asset. I have the biometric data. Blackwood Defense has been running a shadow op to trigger a conflict. They just tried to liquidate a Navy SEAL and a civilian doctor on Allied soil to cover it up." He looked at Alara, watching her fight for Jack's life. "If Commander Reynolds dies before we land," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register, "I will consider it an act of war by a private entity against the United States. I want Blackwood's accounts frozen. I want their executives in cuffs, and I want their satellites grounded. Now." He ripped the headset off and looked at Alara. "Did they hear you?" Alara asked, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her bloody hand. "They heard me," Sterling said. "The gears are turning. By sunrise, Blackwood won't exist." Alara looked down at Jack. The fluids were working. His color was returning, shifting from a ghostly gray to a pale peach. The monitor slowed its frantic beeping. Beep. 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 Steady. Strong. Jack's eyes opened again. This time they were clear. He looked at the red ceiling of the helicopter, then turned his head to look at the woman kneeling in his blood. He reached up his hand, trembling, and pulled the oxygen mask down slightly. "Doc," he rasped. "Don't talk." "Jack." Alara smiled, tears of exhaustion finally pricking her eyes. "Save your strength. You came back," he whispered. "Why?" Alara squeezed his hand. "Because the general gave an order. She takes over now." Jack managed a weak, crooked smile before the morphine dragged him back into the dark. "Hell of a doctor," he muttered. Alara sat back against the vibration of the fuselage. She looked at her hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. She had been a ghost in her own hospital, unseen and unheard. Now she was flying through a storm in a Black Hawk, holding the hand of a man who had changed history under the protection of the most powerful soldier on Earth. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the rotor blades lull her into a restless sleep. 6 weeks later. The Pentagon does not smell like a hospital. It smells of floor wax, old paper, and immense, silent power. The air is recycled and cool, carrying the weight of 1,000 decisions that shape the world. The Hall of Heroes was packed. It was a sea of dress uniforms, Navy whites, Army blues, Marine Corps dress blues. The brass was out in force. Admirals with chests full of ribbons stood shoulder to shoulder with senators and intelligence directors. Alara Vance stood off to the side of the dais. She felt acutely out of place. She pulled at the sleeve of her navy blue suit. It was new, bought specifically for this day, but she felt like an imposter. She kept expecting someone to tap her on the shoulder and ask her to bring them coffee or change a bedpan. "Stop fidgeting." A deep voice rumbled beside her. Alara looked up. Commander Jack Reynolds stood there. He looked magnificent. He was wearing his full dress whites, the golden trident of the Navy SEALs gleaming above a rack of ribbons that told the story of a dozen wars. He was leaning on a cane, a sleek black carbon fiber rod, but he stood tall. "I feel like I crashed a wedding," Alara whispered. "You didn't crash anything," Jack said, his voice gravelly, but warm. "You're the bride." figuratively speaking. This is for you. It's too much, she said. I just did my job. No. Jack turned to face her. The scars on his neck from the tracheotomy were fading, but still visible, a reminder of the night she saved him. Thorne did his job. The nurses did their jobs. You went into the fire. That's not a job, Elara. That's a calling. Before she could answer, the room went silent. General Sterling walked to the podium. The microphone screeched once, then settled. He looked out over the crowd, his face serious. Ladies and gentlemen, Sterling began. We often speak of the warrior spirit. We train for it. We breed it in our special forces. We look for it in the men and women we send to the front lines. He paused, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Elara. But 6 weeks ago, inside a compromised medical facility in Germany, I learned that the warrior spirit does not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears scrubs. Sometimes it is found in the hands of a healer who refuses to accept death as an option. Sterling gestured to the screen behind him. A photo appeared. It was a grainy security camera, still from the ICU hallway. It showed Elara, hair, wild eyes, fierce, standing between Jack's bed and the armed assassins. She held nothing but a defibrillator paddle. A murmur went through the crowd. This woman. Sterling continued, his voice rising, was told she was too young. She was told she was unqualified. She was stripped of her badge and thrown out into the rain. And yet when the lives of my men were on the line, she broke back in. She faced down armed mercenaries. She performed thoracic surgery in a combat zone. He looked at Elara. Dr. Vance, front and center. Elara's legs felt like lead. She walked to the center of the stage. The lights were blinding. An aide stepped forward with a velvet box. Sterling opened it. Inside lay the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award, the highest medal a civilian could receive from the Department of the Navy. It was a heavy gold disc suspended from a blue and yellow ribbon. Sterling pinned it to her lapel. He leaned in close. The President wanted to be here, Sterling whispered, but we thought it best to keep his involvement quiet until the Blackwood trials are over. But he sends his regards, and he says you have a job at Walter Reed whenever you want it. Head of trauma. Elara's eyes widened. General, I haven't even finished my fellowship. Sterling smirked. I think we can waive the paperwork. You've passed the practical exam. He stepped back and saluted her. It wasn't a ceremonial salute. It was a salute of respect. Then Jack Reynolds stepped forward. He didn't salute. He extended his hand. Elara took it. His grip was strong, warm, and alive. Thank you, Jack said loud enough for the microphone to catch, for giving me my life back. Just don't get shot again, Elara quipped, her voice trembling with emotion. I can't promise that. Jack grinned. But if I do, I know who I'm calling. The room erupted. It was a thunderous applause that shook the floorboards. Elara looked out at the sea of faces, people who ran the world, people who commanded armies, and realized they were cheering for her. She touched the cool gold of the medal on her chest. She wasn't the girl who was mistaken for a nurse anymore. She wasn't the student terrified of Dr. Thorne. She was Dr. Elara Vance. And as the general had said, she took over now. And that is the incredible, almost unbelievable true story of Dr. Elara Vance. She was a woman pushed into the shadows by ego and protocol, only to step into the light when it mattered most. She didn't just save a Navy SEAL that night in Germany. She took on a corrupt system and a deadly conspiracy armed with nothing but a scalpel and unbreakable nerve. It just goes to show that true heroism isn't about the rank on your collar, but the fire in your heart. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that. Like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching.